My dinner date trashed his ex-girlfriend all night. She's my sister. She's destroying my son's life, Nathan said, sliding his phone across the cafe table to show me another photo. Look at this beautiful boy, 4 years old, and I haven't seen him in 8 months because his mother is pure evil. The picture showed a smiling child with dark curls and bright green eyes, holding a toy dinosaur. Something about those eyes seemed familiar, but I couldn't place it. Nathan's voice cracked with emotion as he continued. She's turned him against me completely. Won't even let me call on his birthday. I'd matched with Nathan on a dating app 3 weeks ago, and this was our first in-person meeting. He was handsome in that polished way that suggested money and good breeding, with perfectly styled brown hair and an expensive watch that caught the light when he gestured. But 15 minutes into our coffee date, all he wanted to discuss was his custody battle with his ex-girlfriend. I stirred my latte and tried to look sympathetic while he painted himself as the victim of a vindictive woman. The family court system is completely biased against fathers, Nathan continued, his blue eyes filling with tears that seemed genuine. She makes up lies about me, says I'm dangerous. When all I want is to be part of my son's life, I've spent $40,000 on lawyers, and for what? To be treated like a criminal for loving my own child. He showed me another photo, this one of him holding the same little boy at what looked like a park. Both were laughing, and Nathan looked like a devoted father. Something nagged at me about the child's face, but I pushed the feeling aside and focused on being a good listener. Nathan was clearly in pain, and I knew how brutal custody disputes could become. My own sister had gone through a difficult breakup with her son's father 2 years ago, though she rarely talked about the details. I assumed it had been relatively amicable since I'd never heard about any ongoing drama or court battles. What's your son's name? I asked, taking another sip of my drink. Nathan's face lit up at the question, transforming from grief to pure love in an instant. Oliver. Oliver James. He's the light of my life, the reason I get up every morning. Before he was born, I was just drifting through life, but becoming a father gave me purpose. That's why losing him hurts so much. He swiped to a video on his phone, showing Oliver building blocks while giggling. The sound of the child's laugh sent a chill through my chest. I knew that giggle. I'd heard it countless times at family gatherings, birthday parties, and quiet Sunday afternoons. This wasn't just any 4-year-old boy. This was my nephew, my sister Rebecca's son. But that was impossible because my sister's ex-boyfriend was named David, not Nathan. And she'd never mentioned anything about a custody battle or even ongoing contact with Oliver's father. I'm sorry, I said carefully, trying to keep my voice steady. What did you say your ex-girlfriend's name was? Nathan's expression darkened immediately, his jaw clenching with obvious anger. Rebecca fucking Martinez. Sorry for the language, but that woman makes me see red. She's a manipulative narcissist who gets off on controlling people. The worst part is how she acts like this perfect mother when she's actually damaging Oliver psychologically. My hands started trembling, and I set down my mug before I dropped it. This man sitting across from me, telling me his sob story about being kept from his child, was talking about my sister. My sister, who was one of the most gentle, loving people I knew. My sister who would never keep a child from their father without good reason. Something was very wrong with Nathan's version of events, but I needed to be careful not to reveal my connection to Rebecca yet. That must be incredibly difficult, I said, choosing my words carefully. How long were you and Rebecca together? Nathan ran his hand through his hair and sighed dramatically. 3 years total, but the last year was hell. She became increasingly controlling and paranoid, accusing me of things I never did. I think she has some kind of personality disorder. Honestly, the way she can lie with such conviction, it's scary. I thought about my sister, who worked as a pediatric nurse and spent her free time volunteering at animal shelters. The Rebecca I knew was incapable of the manipulation Nathan was describing. Either he was lying about who his ex-girlfriend was, or there were major details he wasn't sharing. I decided to probe deeper while still pretending to be a sympathetic stranger. What kind of lies did she tell about you? I asked, leaning forward as if I were fascinated by his story. Nathan's eyes flashed with anger, and for a split second, I saw something cold and calculating behind his emotional facade. She claimed I was violent, which is completely false. I've never laid a hand on her or Oliver. She said I had anger management problems, that I drank too much, that I was manipulative. All projection, obviously. She was describing herself. The pieces started clicking together in my mind. My sister had indeed mentioned having an ex-boyfriend with anger issues, someone she'd had to get a restraining order against. But she'd been vague about the details, and I'd assumed it was just a precautionary measure. Now I was beginning to understand why she'd been so secretive about Oliver's father, and why she'd moved across town without giving anyone her new address. A restraining order seems extreme if you weren't actually dangerous, I said, testing his reaction. Nathan's face reddened, and his voice rose slightly. That's exactly what I'm talking about. She weaponized the legal system against me, made up stories to get that order. The judge didn't even question her lies, just rubber-stamped her request. Now I can't go near my own son because of her false accusations. I excused myself to use the restroom, my mind racing as I tried to process what I was learning. In the bathroom, I pulled out my phone and scrolled through my contacts until I found my college roommate Lisa, who is now a family law attorney. I sent her a quick text asking if there was a way to look up custody cases online, claiming it was for a friend who was curious about her ex's claims. Lisa responded within minutes with a link to the county court database and instructions for searching. My hands shook as I typed in Nathan's full name, which I'd seen on his driver's license when he'd shown it to pay for our drinks. The search results made my blood run cold. Nathan David Kruger versus Rebecca Martinez, with multiple entries dating back 18 months. The most recent entry was from 6 weeks ago. Motion to terminate parental rights denied. Supervised visitation suspended indefinitely due to violations of protective order and concerning behavior during previous visits. There were also entries for domestic violence charges that had been dropped due to insufficient evidence, and a notation about mandatory anger management classes that Nathan had apparently failed to complete. I took screenshots of everything I could find, my heart pounding as the full picture became clear. Nathan wasn't a loving father being kept from his child by a vindictive ex. He was a dangerous man who had lost his parental rights because he posed a threat to both Rebecca and Oliver, and now he was sitting in a cafe trying to manipulate me into feeling sorry for him, probably hoping I'd help him in some way. When I returned to the table, Nathan was scrolling through more photos on his phone, and I could see they were all of Oliver. Not just the happy family photos he'd shown me earlier, but candid shots that looked like they'd been taken from a distance Oliver at a playground. Oliver walking into what looked like a daycare center, Oliver in the backseat of Rebecca's car. These weren't memories from their relationship, these were surveillance photos. "Where did you get all these pictures?" I asked, trying to keep my voice casual despite the fear growing in my chest. Nathan smiled proudly, completely missing the alarm bells that should have been going off in his head. "I have my ways of keeping tabs on my son. Rebecca thinks she can hide him from me, but a father's love always finds a way. I know where he goes to school, where they live, what his schedule is like." The casual way he admitted to stalking his own child and my sister made me feel sick. I glanced around the cafe, noting the exits and wondering if I should make an excuse to leave immediately, but something told me I needed to hear more, to understand the full extent of what Rebecca was dealing with. If Nathan was dangerous enough to lose his parental rights, she and Oliver could be in real danger. "That's very dedicated of you," I said, hating myself for encouraging him but needing more information. "How do you manage to keep track of them if there's a restraining order?" Nathan's expression grew conspiratorial, and he leaned closer across the table. "Let's just say I've gotten creative. Rebecca thinks she's so smart, moving to a new apartment, changing Oliver's school, but I always figure out where they are." He pulled out his phone again and showed me what looked like a floor plan. "This is Oliver's new classroom at Little Sprouts Academy. He's in the butterfly room with Miss Sarah and Miss Kelly. They do outdoor playtime every day from 2:30 to 3:15, weather permitting. Rebecca usually picks him up at 5:30 on her way home from work." The level of detail was terrifying, and I realized I was listening to a man describe his plan to potentially kidnap his own child. "How did you get all this information?" I asked, genuinely curious about his methods while simultaneously horrified by what he was telling me. Nathan grinned like he'd just shared a clever joke. "You'd be amazed what people will tell you if you know the right things to say." I called the school pretending to be from Rebecca's work, said I needed to confirm Oliver's pickup schedule for emergency purposes. The secretary was very helpful. My phone buzzed with a text from Rebecca. "Hope you're having fun on your date. Can't wait to hear all about it." The irony of the message, given what I was learning about her situation, made my stomach churn. Here she was, checking in on my love life while the father of her child was sitting across from me planning what sounded like stalking or worse. "You know," Nathan continued, his voice dropping to a whisper, "I've been thinking it might be time for more direct action. The legal system has failed me completely, so maybe I need to take matters into my own hands. A man has a right to his child, regardless of what some biased judge says." The threat in his words was unmistakable, and I knew I needed to get out of this situation immediately. I made a show of checking my watch and sighing. "I'm so sorry, but I just remembered I have a conference call with my boss in 20 minutes. Rain check on the rest of our conversation?" Nathan looked disappointed but nodded understandingly. "Of course. This has been really nice talking to someone who actually listens. Most people just assume the mother is always right in these situations." As we stood to leave, Nathan grabbed my arm gently but firmly. "I hope we can see each other again soon. I feel like I can really trust you, and I could use someone in my corner right now. Maybe next time I can show you more pictures of Oliver, tell you more about what Rebecca's been putting us through." The possessive way he said "us," as if I were already part of his crusade against my sister, made my skin crawl. "Absolutely," I lied, forcing a smile. "I'd love to hear more about Oliver. He sounds like an amazing little boy." Nathan beamed and pulled me into a hug that lasted several seconds too long. "Thank you for understanding. It means more than you know to have someone who sees through Rebecca's lies and recognizes what kind of mother she really is." The moment I got to my car, I called Rebecca. She answered on the first ring, sounding cheerful and relaxed. "Hey, how was the coffee date? Please tell me he's not another crypto bro or CrossFit obsessive." Her light tone made what I had to tell her even more difficult. I knew I was about to shatter her sense of safety and probably ruin her evening, but she needed to know immediately. "Rebecca, we need to talk. Right now. It's about Oliver's father." The change in her voice was instant, from casual sisterly teasing to sharp fear. "What about David? What's wrong? Is everything okay?" I realized she was still using his middle name, probably as a form of protection or denial. "His name is Nathan, Rebecca. Nathan David Kruger, and I just spent 2 hours listening to him describe his plans to take Oliver." The silence on the other end of the phone lasted so long I thought the call had dropped. Finally, Rebecca's voice came through, barely a whisper. "You met Nathan? How is that possible? Where?" I explained the dating app match, the coffee date, his obsession with showing me photos of Oliver and detailing his surveillance of their daily routine. With each detail I shared, I could hear Rebecca's breathing becoming more labored. "He knows about the new school," she said, her voice breaking. "I thought I'd been so careful. I changed everything, used my maiden name for the enrollment, paid cash for the deposit so there wouldn't be a paper trail. How did he find us again?" I could hear her moving around, probably checking locks and windows. The fear in her voice made me want to drive straight to her apartment and stay there until Nathan was safely behind bars. "Rebecca, you need to call the police right now." He showed me floor plans of Oliver's classroom, detailed schedules, photos that look like he's been following you. "This isn't just violating the restraining order anymore. This is planning something serious. I heard her take a shaky breath, trying to compose herself. The police won't do anything until he actually does something. I've called them before when I spotted him near the apartment, and they said seeing someone in public isn't a crime. The frustration in her voice told me this wasn't the first time she'd tried to get help from law enforcement. I thought about Nathan's casual admission that he'd lost supervised visitation due to concerning behavior, and wondered what he'd done during those visits that had alarmed the social workers enough to terminate his access to Oliver completely. Nathan. What happened during his supervised visits that made them suspend his rights? I asked, dreading the answer. Rebecca was quiet for a long moment, and when she spoke, her voice was hollow. He would tell Oliver that I was keeping them apart on purpose, that I didn't want them to love each other. He taught Oliver to lie to me about what they did together, said it was their special secret, and he would take photos of Oliver without permission, even though that was explicitly forbidden. The pattern was becoming clearer and more disturbing. Nathan had been using his limited access to Oliver to undermine Rebecca's authority and create confusion in the child's mind. Now that he'd lost even that supervised contact, he was escalating to stalking and surveillance, probably planning some kind of confrontation or kidnapping attempt. There's something else, Rebecca continued, her voice getting stronger as anger replaced fear. Last month, someone tried to pick Oliver up from school claiming to be his uncle. The teachers didn't recognize him and followed protocol by checking with me first, but the description matched Nathan. He's not just watching us anymore. He's actively trying to take Oliver. This was the final piece of evidence I needed to understand just how dangerous Nathan had become. I made a decision that would change everything. Rebecca, I'm going to help you stop him. He thinks I'm a potential ally. Someone who believes his victim story and sympathizes with his situation. I can use that to gather evidence of his plans, maybe even get him to confess to violating the restraining order. The idea scared me, but I couldn't let my sister and nephew live in constant fear of this predator. Absolutely not, Rebecca said immediately. You have no idea how dangerous he is when he doesn't get what he wants. I've seen him lose his temper, and it's terrifying. I won't let you put yourself at risk for us. But I was already formulating a plan, thinking about how I could use Nathan's trust in me to protect my family and potentially put him behind bars where he belonged. I'm going to text him back and suggest another date. This time, I'll record our conversation and try to get him to admit to stalking you and attempting to take Oliver from school. With that evidence, the police will have to take action. I could hear Rebecca starting to object, but I cut her off. He's escalating, Rebecca. The next step after surveillance and attempted kidnapping is something we don't want to think about. We have to act now. The next morning, I sent Nathan a text saying I'd been thinking about our conversation and would love to continue it over dinner. His response came back within minutes, enthusiastic and grateful that someone was finally taking his side in his custody battle. We made plans to meet at an upscale restaurant downtown, the kind of place where people talked in low voices, and the background noise would be perfect for hiding a recording device. I spent the day researching recording apps for my phone and practicing how to position it in my purse to capture clear audio. I also contacted Lisa again, asking for advice on what kind of statements would be most useful for building a criminal case against Nathan. She warned me about the legal risks of recording someone without their consent, but agreed that if he was planning to harm a child, the evidence would be crucial regardless of how it was obtained. That evening, I dressed carefully for dinner, choosing an outfit that looked attractive but not too revealing, friendly but not flirtatious. I needed Nathan to trust me completely, to see me as someone who understood his position and supported his right to have access to his son. The thought of pretending to agree with his twisted worldview made me sick, but I kept thinking about Oliver's sweet face and Rebecca's terrified voice. Nathan was already waiting at the restaurant when I arrived, wearing an expensive suit and holding a bouquet of white roses. He stood and kissed my cheek, playing the role of the perfect gentleman, even as I knew he was planning to destroy my family. You look beautiful, he said, pulling out my chair. I brought these for you as a thank you for listening to me yesterday. It's been so long since I've met someone who actually understands what I'm going through. Over appetizers, Nathan continued his performance as the wronged father, showing me more photos of Oliver and detailing the various ways Rebecca had supposedly undermined their relationship. But as the evening progressed and he drank more wine, his carefully constructed facade began to slip. His comments about Rebecca became more vicious, his plans for regaining access to Oliver more specific and disturbing. I've been doing research on parental kidnapping laws, he said casually, cutting his steak with precise movements. Technically, it's not kidnapping if it's your own child, especially if you can prove the other parent is unfit, and I have plenty of evidence that Rebecca is damaging Oliver psychologically by keeping us apart. The way he discussed kidnapping his own son as if it were a legal strategy rather than a violent crime showed just how disconnected from reality he'd become. I encouraged him to elaborate, playing the role of the fascinated listener while my phone recorded every word from inside my purse. Nathan detailed his surveillance operation, his attempts to infiltrate Oliver's school, even his plans to follow Rebecca home from work to confirm their new address. With each admission, I felt more confident that I was gathering the evidence needed to put him away. The key is timing, Nathan continued, his voice growing more animated as he shared his strategy. Rebecca has this routine where she stops at the grocery store every Thursday after picking Oliver up from school. They're always in there for about 20 minutes, and she parks in the same section of the lot. It would be very easy for someone to approach them during that window, especially if Oliver recognized them and went willingly. My blood turned to ice as I realized Nathan wasn't just fantasizing about taking Oliver. He had a specific plan, down to the location and timing. This wasn't a desperate father's pipe dream. This was an abduction plot, and he was scheduled to execute it in less than 48 hours. I forced myself to remain calm and encouraging, knowing that any sign of alarm would make him suspicious and potentially cause him to change his plans. That sounds like it could work, I said, hating every word but knowing I needed him to continue talking. What would you do after that? Where would you take Oliver? Nathan's eyes lit up with excitement, and he leaned closer across the table. I have a cabin in the mountains, completely off the grid. We could stay there until the heat dies down. Give Oliver time to remember how much he loves his daddy without Rebecca's poison in his ear. The recording app on my phone had been running for over an hour, capturing Nathan's detailed confession to planning a kidnapping. But I realized I needed more than just his words. I needed him to incriminate himself in a way that would leave no room for doubt or legal maneuvering. Taking a deep breath, I decided to push him further. Nathan, can I ask you something personal? I said, reaching across the table to touch his hand. Yesterday you mentioned that Rebecca claimed you were violent. I know that's not true, but I'm curious about what might have given her that impression. Sometimes people misinterpret normal reactions as aggression. It was a risky question, but I needed him to admit to the behavior that had cost him his parental rights. Nathan's expression darkened, and for a moment I saw the man who had terrified my sister badly enough to get a restraining order. Rebecca is very sensitive, he said, his voice taking on a cold edge. She would overreact to normal discipline, claim I was being too rough with Oliver when I was just trying to teach him proper behavior. And yes, sometimes I would lose my patience with her constant nagging and criticism. A man can only take so much before he has to assert himself. The euphemistic way he described what was clearly domestic violence made my skin crawl, but I nodded sympathetically. That must have been so frustrating. What kind of discipline did you try with Oliver that she objected to? Nathan's answer revealed the true reason he'd lost access to his son, and it was worse than I'd imagined. Oliver is a very strong-willed child, and Rebecca was letting him get away with everything. When he would refuse to eat his vegetables or wouldn't stop crying, she would just coddle him instead of teaching him consequences, so I would make him stand in the corner until he calmed down, sometimes for an hour or more. And if he kept acting out, I might give him a light swat to help him focus. The casual way he described emotionally abusing a toddler made me want to throw my wine in his face. Rebecca called it abuse. Can you believe that? Teaching a child self-control and respect for authority is not abuse. But she threatened to call child services, so I had to be more careful about when and how I disciplined Oliver. That's when she really started poisoning him against me, telling him that daddy was mean and that he should be afraid of me. Nathan's version of events was so twisted from reality that I wondered if he actually believed his own lies. As the evening continued, Nathan's admissions became more and more damning. He confessed to violating the restraining order multiple times, to stalking Rebecca and Oliver, to planning a kidnapping, and to a pattern of emotional and physical abuse that fully explained why the court had terminated his parental rights. My phone captured every word, creating an audio record that would be impossible for him to deny or explain away. When Nathan walked me to my car after dinner, he was practically glowing with satisfaction. Thank you again for listening and understanding, he said, pulling me into another uncomfortably long hug. It's been so therapeutic to talk to someone who sees the situation clearly. I feel like I finally have an ally in this fight. The irony of his gratitude, given that I was about to use everything he'd told me to destroy his plans, would have been funny if the situation weren't so serious. I'm so glad I could help, I lied, forcing one final smile. Good luck with everything, Nathan. I really hope you get to see Oliver soon. It wasn't entirely a lie. I did hope he would see Oliver soon, but it would be from behind the bars of a jail cell during supervised visitation in a correctional facility. The moment I got home, I called Rebecca and told her everything. She was simultaneously horrified by the details of Nathan's plan and relieved that we finally had the evidence needed to stop him. We spent the rest of the night preparing our strategy, uploading the recordings to cloud storage, and getting in touch with both the police and Rebecca's attorney. The next morning, Detective Maria Gonzalez listened to the entire 2-hour recording while taking detailed notes. Nathan's casual admissions to stalking, violating protective orders, and planning a kidnapping gave the police everything they needed to obtain an arrest warrant. They also had enough evidence to charge him with multiple felonies that would put him behind bars for years if convicted. We'll pick him up this afternoon, Detective Gonzalez assured us. In the meantime, I want you and Oliver to stay somewhere safe. Do you have family or friends you can stay with until he's in custody? Rebecca nodded, explaining that she'd already made arrangements to take Oliver to our parents' house, which was in a different county, and would be harder for Nathan to find even if he somehow made bail. The arrest went smoothly. Nathan was taken into custody at his apartment without incident, apparently so confident in his plans that he hadn't considered the possibility of being caught. A search of his home revealed additional evidence of his obsession with Rebecca and Oliver, including printed maps of their neighborhood, schedules he'd compiled of their activities, and disturbing journal entries about his right to take back what belonged to him. 6 months later, Nathan pleaded guilty to stalking, violating a protective order, and attempted kidnapping in exchange for a reduced sentence of 8 years in prison. The judge noted during sentencing that his complete lack of remorse and continued insistence that he was the victim made him an ongoing danger to Rebecca and Oliver. The permanent restraining order was extended to include me, since Nathan had discovered my role in his arrest and made several threatening statements about getting revenge. Rebecca and Oliver moved to a different state shortly after the trial, starting fresh where Nathan's reach couldn't extend even after his eventual release. She sent me photos from Oliver's 5th birthday party, showing a happy, confident child who was finally free to grow up without fear. The nightmare was over, but the experience had taught us all how dangerous the intersection of parental rights and domestic violence could be when the system failed to protect the most vulnerable victims.